unexpected. There's the best and worst days of this life. You're always on my side. You in the pain, you in the pain, you in the promise, you in the days, the furnace from my faith. You're the fourth and the flame. I don't need you, I don't need you to know what the future is like. Because the past could talk, you would tell me this. My God is a finished yet. If he did before, he can do it again. So I'm trusting in what's coming. For the God I know, he's known to fix for me. Some says I can trust him with what's left. For the God I know, it's not faithfulness. There's what I had, there was behind me. Consequences and lows and in-betweens. God, you go ahead of me. And when you call me, I will follow. If the water falls beneath my feet, then you pull me from the deep. I don't need to know, I don't need to know what the future says. Cause the past good thought will tell me this. Our God is a finished yet. If he did before, he can do it again. So I trust him in what's coming. For the God I know, his love to fit for me. What the future says, come on. I don't need to know what the future says. Cause if the past could talk, he would tell me this. My God isn't finished yet. If he did before, he can do it again. So I trust him in what's coming. For the God I know is enough for faith. My God is a finished yet. If he did before, he can do it again. So I trust in what's coming. For the God I know is enough for faith for me. For the God, for the God I know he's enough to faith for me. People who come together, as strangers, neighbors, our blood is one. Children of generations, of every nation, a kingdom come. So don't let your heart be troubled. Hold your head up high, don't fear no evil. Fix our eyes on this one truth. God is madly in love with you. So take courage, hold on, be strong. Remember where help comes from. Come on, sing it. Whoa, whoa, whoa. One more time. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Jesus, our redemption, our salvation. is in his blood. Jesus, light of heaven, friend forever, his kingdom. Come on, sing with me. So don't let your heart be troubled. Come on. Hold your head up high, don't fear no evil. Fix your eyes on this one truth. God is mighty, He's mighty. So take courage, hold on, be strong. Remember where help comes. We all sing together, come on. Whoa, whoa, whoa. See everybody hands with me. Come on. Everybody like this. Yeah. Come on, come on. We all sing together. Swing wide. Sing with me. Come on. Sing wide, all you heavens. Let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything will grab, repeat the sound. Children, clean hands, pure heart, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. One more time, sing on, come on, come on. Swing wide, oh you heavens, let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything will bright, repeat their sound. All his children, clean hands, pure heart, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. One last time, with everything, come on. Swing wide, all you heavens, let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything will bright, repeat the sound. All his children, clean hands, pure heart, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. Sing, whoa, 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 whoa. All you heavens, let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything will back, repeat the sound. All his children, clean hands, pure heart, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. We all sing Jesus. Jesus, our redemption, our salvation is what? Is in his blood. Very loud, come on. Yeah. Jesus, Jesus, light of heaven, friend forever, his kingdom come.
So the Bible talks about 6 rings of relationships around Jesus. 6 rings of relationships around Jesus that characterize something important in our relationship to God. 6 rings. One's really big, next one gets smaller, 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 until you get as close to Jesus as you can get. And that's what we've been talking about. We started with the crowds. And the crowds represent those who follow Jesus to the place of just watching and listening. They see Jesus from a distance. They hear his words. They possibly watch him do a healing. But as far as they get to Jesus, it's just watching and listening. And then we had the 5,000s. And the 5,000, they followed Jesus to the place of feeding and healing. Remember the story? I talked about it last week. The story of the 5,000 when they followed Jesus to this remote place because they want to be fed by Jesus. They want more than just hearing and watching. They want to be fed. They want to experience a miracle. And so they go into this far remote place and they have no food. And then Jesus takes the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and he feeds all of them. They follow Jesus to that place. And then we have the 70. And the 70, they go a little bit closer to Jesus than the 5,000 because they follow Jesus to the place of working and serving. They're the ones that Jesus sent out into the cities and the villages to spread the good news and to do the same work that Jesus has been doing. And then we get to the 12, which I will talk about tonight. And the 12 represent those who follow Jesus to the place of leaving all and walking with him. The 12 represent those who move one circle closer to Jesus. And if you're in the 12, then you know that when you're in this place, it's no longer about what Jesus does for you or about what you do for Jesus. It's only about Jesus walking with you. When I was 19 years old, I met my childhood idol when I was 19 years old, and his name is Michael Jordan. I met Michael Jordan when I was 19 years old. Like my entire life, I looked up to Michael Jordan. Everybody who grew up in my era looked at Michael Jordan and thought he was the greatest of all time, and we still think he's the greatest of all time. You all have heard me talk about basketball, and he's the one that I would watch, and I would go into my backyard where my parents had made a basketball court for me, and it was next to the garage, and the garage had a door that you could go on in through the side, and it had a glass pane that you could look into the garage. Well, if the sun was shining the right way onto that glass, it turned into a mirror. And so I would shoot basketballs like I was Michael Jordan winning the championship, like trying to be Michael Jordan day after day after day after day. And then I got into high school, and I started to get recruited to go play basketball in college. And they all have their tricks to get you to come to their college. They give you bait. It's the little cheese they dangle in front of you, and they say, follow the cheese down this road, and you'll come to my college, and you'll have all the things you've ever dreamed of. And this one particular college said, if you come to our college, you will get one thing that you will not get anywhere else. You will get to meet Michael Jordan, but more than that, you will get to play a basketball game against the legend Michael Jordan. And you all are like, you liar. Now, of course, I chose that college. Why would I not choose the college that I get to play the greatest basketball player of all time? I was a freshman in college. It was the summer before I actually started my classes, and they brought me up to the college campus because they were the ones who hosted the Michael Jordan basketball camp because it was near downtown Chicago. Michael Jordan would come every single day, and there would be hundreds of grade schoolers, middle schoolers, high schoolers whose parents paid thousands of dollars for them to come to Michael Jordan's basketball camp. And as a college basketball player now, I was a camp counselor. So every day my job was to wake up early and teach the kids drills and do whatever the coach told me to do. And then at the end of the day, we'd all get together, and Michael Jordan would sit everyone down around him, and he would give them a pep talk, or he'd give them some advice. Or this one time, he had a foul shooting competition with one of the kids at the camp. And the competition was if he could make the same amount of shots or more than Michael Jordan, then he would take his shoes off and give them to the kid. Imagine that pressure this kid was feeling. The kid shot the foul shot, so nervous, couldn't hit the rim. He was so embarrassed. And then Michael Jordan, at the end of the game, took his shoes off and handed them to the kid. It was so cool. And then it got to the point all of us were waiting for, all the college athletes who were like, this is why we're here. And the place was packed. I couldn't believe it. In the middle of summer, small Division III college, seats 5,000 people in their gym, and there are people wall to wall waiting to watch Michael Jordan play, all of us scrubs. Now, some of you in the room who know professional sports, he brought other people along with him. He brought Richard Dent, who played for the Chicago Bears, to play basketball on his team. He brought Juwan Howard, who played for Michigan the year they went to the Final Four with the horrible timeout that Chris Webber called at the end of the game to ruin the whole championship. He brought Jeff Capel, who was playing for Duke at the time and is now a coach in college basketball. He brought all of these great players, and then here stands Coy Lindsey from Lakeland, Ohio, playing at a Division III university. And we played 5-on-5s. It was shirts versus skins, which is the most embarrassing thing when you know that Michael Jordan is going to choose shirts and you're on the opposite team of Michael Jordan, and so you have to go skins in front of 5,000 people watching you play with just your shorts on. It's weird, creepy, but that's what happened. And we were playing 5-on-5, and there was this one moment where I was paired up against this girl who was in the WNBA. He brought her along too, and so I was paired up to guard her because she was the point guard on the other team. And Michael Jordan did his famous move, if you watch Michael Jordan, where he would like have his back to the basket, palming the ball, and he would kind of do this. And my player that I was guarding ran around him, and so I followed her around, and I was, his hand, like he didn't know I was coming. I almost grabbed the ball out of Michael Jordan's hands. I would have been the biggest loser who ever done that, but I almost did it. So there came the moment, and we were playing 5-on-5, and my team beat his team. So we got to stay on the court and play him the second time, and then he destroyed us. He really played the next game. A few days later, at the end of the camp, everybody gets a chance to go meet Michael Jordan personally. Anybody in the room ever met a celebrity? I mean, I think they meet you, but they really don't care about you. And here's how it happened with Michael Jordan at his camp. We had everybody in the gym, and they would call you one by one, and you would leave the gym, and then you would go down this dark hallway by yourself that felt like a hospital. The back hallways of a university. You're walking down the hallway all by yourself, cold walls, like just rubber floors, and you're thinking to yourself, I can't wait to meet Michael Jordan. And he's in this hidden room. You get to the door, and they open it up for you, and you walk in, and Michael Jordan's sitting at a table. And he has bodyguards standing on both sides of the table. And you walk up to where he's sitting, and he looks at you. What's your name, young man? And you hand him whatever it is you want him to sign. He signs it. He hands it to you. And that's it. And I was like, wow, that wasn't as cool as I thought. There's another time when I met someone that I really looked up to. This time I was in seminary. It was about 5 years later. And in the seminary I went to in Orlando, they gave you an opportunity to go take classes with something called the Hispanic Summer Program. And the Hispanic Summer Program got all the professors around the country who were Latinos or Latinas teaching in theology, and they would bring them together on a campus. This happened to be in Chicago again. And I just signed up to go, even though the majority of the classes were in Spanish. They had a few classes that were in English. I went to Hispanic Summer Program, and I think I was one of 2 people who could not speak Spanish. I was one of only 2 people who was not Latino. Like, it was the most foreign place I've ever felt myself in my entire life. I remember walking in the first session where they introduced everyone, the professors and the people, and they had a map, and it was turned upside down. And I was like, wow, that's different. I've never seen somebody turn a map upside down. And the first thing that I learned at the Hispanic Summer Program is, well, if you pay attention to most maps in America, who's in the center of the map? North America. And they're like, we're from all over the world. We're from Latin America, Central America, South America, and we think sometimes you have to look at the world a little bit different. And so we turn the map upside down so that the United States isn't right in the center middle anymore. And I was like, wow, I'm in for a rude awakening here. Like, this is not the world I came from. I came from small town Ohio that nobody speaks any language other than English, and not that very well. And here I am in the midst of people who are only speaking Spanish. But one of my favorite professors was there. His name is Justo Gonzalez. And he wrote the 2 books that every seminary uses, which is The Story of Christianity, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And then he writes all these other books. And he's like the papa of Hispanic theology. Everybody who's a Latino or Latino studying theology, they look up to this guy like there's Jesus and then there's Justo Gonzalez. And I had come to love this guy, like his writings, his person, like who he is. He left Cuba as a young boy, and he came to America. And because of the situation in Cuba, he never really got to go back and be with his family growing up because of all the turmoil that was happening there. And he tells that story and how that shaped his view of God and all these things. It's great. He's awesome. And I found out from my friend, the professor there, that Justo was going to go on a walk. And my friend said, I'm going to go on this walk, and you can come on the walk with me, with Justo Gonzalez. And I was like, thinking back to my Michael Jordan days. Is it going to be another one of those where the person doesn't give a rip about who I am? And he's like, no, just come with me. So we're at this seminary, and I go with him, and this guy literally, I'm telling you, he's like a grandpa. And he's walking with us, and he looks at me, and he starts talking to me like he's known me for all of my life. And we're just walking down this dirt road, and this man is so far above my level in intelligence, but he speaks on my level that I can understand. I will never forget just walking with him, just walking with the man. I'll never forget just walking with him because he made me feel like I was important. Big difference between meeting Michael Jordan, who did not care who I was, and this man who wanted to know who I was. And in the Bible, we learn that Jesus gives you an opportunity to walk with him. Some of you have met Jesus in a dark room, and he's given you an autograph, and you've walked out, and you've never said a word to him since, and you don't feel like he said a word to you since. But that's not the Jesus I know. The Jesus I know says, come walk with me. Come walk with me. Just come walk with me. But you know, walking with Jesus requires walking away from something else. Walking with Jesus requires walking away from something else. The scriptures tell us. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 4, verse 19, we find something. What we find is that Jesus uses this phrase. Anytime he calls the 12, he uses the same phrase. He says, follow me. That's the only instruction he gives is just follow me. And so in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 4, verse 19, Jesus says to Peter and his brother Andrew, follow me. And in verse 20, it tells us that Peter and his brother Andrew, who have never met Jesus before, as far as we know in the scriptures, never met him before, just heard about him, probably a part of the crowds who became a part of the 5,000, who became a part of the 70, and now Jesus says, follow me. And it tells us in verse 20 that they left their fishing nets and they followed him. And then in verse 21, Jesus calls James and his brother John, follow me. And it tells us in verse 22 that James and his brother John left their boat and their father, and they followed him. Now, we have fishermen in the room. I can see you just by the way, the clothes that you're wearing and the hats on your head, and I just know you personally. Can you imagine you're fishing, you're doing something important, and somebody comes to you and says, leave those things. Leave your fishing pole and leave your boat and leave your father and come follow me. And then we see in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 9, verse 9, that Jesus also calls Matthew. And it tells us in verse 10 that Matthew gets up from where he is and he follows Jesus. There's a pattern. I think you know it. And I'm about to tell you something that will sound so simple, but honestly, it's pretty deep. What we see in all of these stories about Jesus saying, follow me, the common thread, the common theme is that in order to go, you must leave. Let that sink in. In order to go, you must leave. You may have to leave your plans. You may have to leave your family. You may have to leave a habit. You may have to leave a practice. You may have to leave your fears in order to follow Jesus. But Jesus says to all of us, hey, come follow me. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16, verse 24, Jesus says something to the 12. He says, if you want to follow Jesus, if anyone wants to follow Jesus, then let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. If you are here tonight and you want to get closer to God, there's one way you can do it, and that is to walk with Jesus. It's to follow Jesus. And the call is the same for you today. The call is, come follow me. Here's the struggle for the 12 and for many of us. The struggle is we sometimes don't like what Jesus has to say. We don't like it. We don't like it because it's challenging. We don't like it because what the crowds say is more satisfying. Now, Judas, one of the 12, is the unfortunate example of what this looks like. Judas, one of the 12, is talked about in the Gospel of Luke chapter 22, because in the Gospel of Luke chapter 22, Jesus goes up onto the mountain to pray. This is the night before Jesus is about to be crucified. He goes up onto the mountain to pray, and he chooses 3 of the disciples to come with him. He chooses Peter, James, and John. Poor Andrew got left out. James and John, brothers, got to come. Just Peter, not Andrew. He invites them onto the mountain to pray. And the reason why he's going to pray is because he knows the next day he's going to be crucified. But he knows that's the will of God. He needs help saying, I just need somebody to pray for me. So agonizing, he prays all night long. God, if you can take this cup from me, please take this cup from me. Don't make me go to the cross. It's not what I want to do, but if it's your will, I'll do it. And 3 different times during that night, while he's praying with the 3 disciples, they fall asleep. Like some of you, when I preach a message, you fall asleep 3 times. I'm like, come on, just stay with me a little bit longer. Just stay with me a little bit longer. 3 times that night. Jesus just needed them to stay up with him, and they fell asleep 3 times. And the final time that Jesus wakes up the disciples and he's talking to them, something happens. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 22, starting with verse 47, it says this. It says, suddenly a crowd came, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. No sooner were the words out of his mouth than a crowd showed up. And Judas, the one of the 12, in the lead. He came right up to Jesus to kiss him. And Jesus said, Judas, you would betray the Son of Man with a kiss. If you don't know the story, Judas is the one of the 12 disciples who turned Jesus over to the ones who crucified him. He was one of the 12. There were the crowds. Move closer, there were the 5,000. Move closer, there were the 70. He's one of the 12. One of the 12. And because he has this thing called a love for money, he turns Jesus in. Jesus is going to be crucified no matter what. But Judas, one of the 12, didn't have the courage to follow Jesus because he didn't like what Jesus said. Because what Jesus said, if you're going to come follow me, then you have to deny yourself everything, which means to give up your selfish desires. Now, earlier in the book of Luke, we find Judas, and he's making a side deal. When I was in seminary, I was working as valet, parking. It's like the dirtiest business, it felt like, because I would collect all of these tips. And the way that the valet service worked, I was working for, as I got the tips, but I didn't get to keep the tips. I had to take it to the person that was running the business, and they would give me a cut of it. But every time I had the cash, he would tell me to meet him somewhere else. And I was thinking, man, are there drugs in the dollar bills that somebody's giving me? I don't understand. Like, what, I have to meet you in a strange parking lot? It felt like a weird deal. And Judas went, and he is making a bad deal. And he goes to the ones who he knows is against Jesus, who want him to be killed. And he goes to them and he says, you know what? I have some inside information about Jesus. How much are you going to pay me? Like, show me the money. Remember? Show me the money. And they tell him the amount of money. And he's like, okay, I'll do it. For money, one of the 12 turns in Jesus to his death. Like, he's the one that wrote the ticket. Jesus was already going to be crucified, but he's the one that wrote the sentence. For money. Now, you may think that sounds strange, but in the Bible it talks about the love of money is what? The root of all evil. And I think there's something we can learn about that, which is the crowds outside of Jesus are the ones who are saying money is more important than Jesus. Making more money, spending more money, using more money, earning more money. Money, money, money. Money's what makes you happy. Remember the song? Money, 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 money. It's all about money. Gotta wake you all up somehow. Man. But here's what happens to Judas. He listened to the crowds more than to Christ. The truth is, he may have come out of the crowds, but the crowds never came out of him. And instead of following with Jesus, he fell into sin. You know, I think there's some people here tonight who are ready to move closer to God. I think some of you are here tonight and you're ready to move closer to God. I believe that you hear Jesus calling you to leave your plans, to leave your problems, to leave certain people, to leave unhealthy practices, to leave your fears and come follow me. I believe some of you here tonight, you're hearing Jesus calling you, come follow me. You're ready to move one step closer to Jesus. Now, don't get me wrong. There will be moments when you move closer to Jesus when you don't like the words that he's saying. And the reason why, I already told you, is because they're challenging. But don't fall into the temptation of believing that you can trust the crowds more than you can trust Jesus. Because the only thing you will find out is the same thing that Judas found out, which is you can't walk with Jesus and walk with the crowds at the same time. Because what happens is that you end up walking away without Jesus. But when you walk with Jesus, the Bible tells us that God's power will flow through you like rivers of living water. The band come up and we'll close out the message early tonight. You all got a free pass. But in the scriptures, it talks about different festivals and ceremonies. And there's this one festival in the Bible, in the New Testament, that they practice. They've been practicing it for years. It goes all the way back to the book of Exodus when the people were in slavery and then God rescues them from slavery, where God parted the Red Sea. Remember that story? And they walk through it. Well, while they're in the desert wandering for 40 years, they don't have any water. And the stories tell us this strange moment where Moses has his staff and he goes up and he cracks the rock and water comes out of the rock and they have water to drink. And so they set a whole festival for this, celebrating, remembering when God rescued them from Israel. It's a week-long celebration. I wish we still had week-long celebrations. I get off work for a week. One entire week called the Festival of Unleavened Bread. And so we talk about this, and we see this happening. And there's this part in this festival where all the priests, they gather water into these big urns, and they go to the top of the temple. Now, we have churches that we walk into now that are friendly for people who are aging. We don't have steps so much anymore. Well, back then, they built them up high because they wanted them to be above the city, someplace that everybody can see. And so the priests, they would gather water in these big urns, and they would take them to the top of the temple steps, and all together at once, with everybody else standing at the feet of the steps, just waiting and watching, crowds of people. Like everyone has gathered to see this. The priest all at once would dump the urns of water to come flowing down the steps like a beautiful waterfall in remembrance of God delivering them from Egypt and providing for their needs while wandering in the wilderness. And it tells us every time this happens, the people would shout and they would scream and they would celebrate God's goodness in their lives. The only thing I can think of that's similar is the 4th of July. That's the only thing I can think to compare this to, is that millions of people every single year in America stop their lives to go watch stuff blow up in the sky. And why do we do it? Because we're celebrating our freedom. And if you've ever been to a good 4th of July celebration, people are cheering, like people are clapping and people are happy, and they're remembering the people who died for us, and they're remembering the forefathers of our generations, and they're thinking about all the great things we've done as a nation and the direction that we are going as a country, and we celebrate every 4th of July, and every year they would get together to celebrate the water coming down the steps. But something happens in the Bible when Jesus is around for this to happen. The water coming down the steps, everybody's celebrating. And Jesus says this. He says, anyone who is thirsty, let them come to me, and I will quench your thirst. I will quench your thirst. Whoever believes in me, Jesus says, as that water was coming down, he shouts above everybody, whoever believes in me, the Spirit of God will flow from within you like rivers of living water. And that's really what we're talking about. Is you can be as close to God as you want to be. You can be in the crowd. You can be in the 5,000. You can be in the 70. You can be in the 12. But when you get close enough to Jesus that you can walk with Jesus, forsaking all else and following in his steps, it says that God's power flows through you like rivers of living water that nourishes the souls of people around you. That's beautiful. But some of you are going to have to take another step. And in order to take that step, you're going to have to leave. Stand with me. Stand with me. And some of you are here and you've heard this message and you're like, Coy, man, I'm okay with being in the crowds. I'm okay with being in the 5,000. I'm okay with being in the 70. I'm okay with being in the 12. And then there's others of you who are like, I'm not satisfied. It's not enough for me. It's just not okay with me. I want more. I want the best that God has to give. And you're at this place where you have listened to God, and you have been fed by God, and you have served God, and you have gotten close to God as part of the 12, and you want to walk with Jesus. But in order to do that, you have to leave some things. You have to leave some things. And I could list a lot of stuff that we've done in church history, all the list of things that you need to leave. I don't have to do that because God has already told you. So tonight is a moment for you to say to God, I hear you. I hear the call to come follow me. And I realize that in order to come follow you, I may have to leave my nets. I may have to leave the boat. I may have to leave my father. I may have to leave my inheritance and my hometown and all the things that make me feel secure. But God, if it means walking with you, I'll do it. If it means rivers of living water flowing through me, I'll do it. Some of you are at that place. You just haven't taken that leap yet. And it's the time for you to do it. Like, now's the moment for you to say, God, I don't have to wait anymore. I don't have to be afraid anymore. I don't have to be Judas who falls back into the things that I don't want to do. I can walk with Jesus. I can walk with Jesus. So as I pray for you, you will know if this is you. Like, you'll know it's you. And whatever it is that God is asking you to leave it here tonight. And then go follow Jesus. Let's pray. God, help us leave so that we can go and walk with you. In your name we pray. Amen.